I think if you look at Putin, his object has never changed, and he was determined that Ukraine wouldn't go to the Western camp because it was Russia. Um, at what point he decided that he should stop it or keep it Russian by an invasion, and what point he thought he would get it by diplomacy, that they'd never do it, I suppose, is difficult to say. I mean, the way we see it in our series, when it looked like Ukraine was going to join the EU, that was a step too far to the West, and therefore he had to stop it.
Her latest documentary, a 3-part epic, Putin versus the West, does exactly this, following Russia's decade-long path up to the invasion of Ukraine. Norma joins me now. Norma, welcome to the programme. I mean, first of all, when you set out on a documentary series like Putin versus the West, do you have a sort of narrative already in mind?
No way. And maybe it's one of the reasons that's different from other documentaries. But first of all, we have the luxury of time. I mean, that's the thing that, thank goodness, the BBC gives us, that we could otherwise never do it, because we absolutely don't know. I mean, we're looking to make the viewers feel they're inside the room when the really big political international relations decisions are taken. But, well, you have a subject. But first of all, we have to find out what the decisions are. And then in a way, that's the hardest. But
there is a very strong narrative to this 3-part series in that what it seems to me to do is look at the preceding just over a decade before the full invasion of Ukraine and look at the changing relationships between Putin and Western leaders. And also, I mean, to me, the scary thing about it was to watch him often 5 chess moves ahead of everybody else, and possibly still, which was the most worrying thing.
That's the question to be decided. But when we started, well, the BBC said to us, why don't you look at your 2012 series, which was called Putin, Russia and the West, which looks at from the time Putin came to power until then. My first reaction was no way, no. Too hard. I mean, back when we made it in 2012, relations between Russia and the West were cooling. And Obama was in fact, Putin had stepped down to prime minister because the Constitution only gave him two terms, and his prime minister was president. And President Medvedev and Obama had an excellent relationship. And that's what Medvedev was in power when we made the programs. We had incredible access in the Kremlin. We worked with Putin's office, with Dmitry Peskov, who secured us virtually all the access we wanted. And we showed some amazing relationships between Condi Rice and Putin's top spy.
So what changed in terms of the temperature and what, having studied this for at least a couple of decades or more, in fact, how do you think those temperature changes are affected? What is it down to personalities? You know, you talk about George Bush and Condoleezza Rice having quite a good relationship with Russia, which might seem surprising because he would seem in every other way completely opposed to
pretty hard line.
Yeah.
Cold warriors.
And Obama and Medvedev, again, how on earth would that relationship flourish? So is it based on personal connection, or is it about policies at that time?
Well, I think it's a bit of that. That, in fact, one thing I think our series shows over the 3 programs is the way Putin, well, as far as his attitude to Ukraine, it's been there from the beginning. It would be fine for other former satellites to move to the West. He doesn't care. Bulgaria can go. The satellite states can go. But Ukraine, that's Russian. And Russian is Russian, and it stays Russian. and so it's got to stay firmly in Russia's orbit. It would be better, of course, if the Soviet Union would come back, but otherwise they've got to stay Russian. And I think if you look backwards, the wonder of hindsight, you can see that that's always been so. But his style, his strategy, his personality, I think, has changed over the years he's been prime minister.
In what way? In what way would you say that he's changed? Because of course now, you know, with the kind of polarizing of views that happens, you know, Putin is bad, and everyone fighting against him is on the side of right. But politics aren't always that black and white, are they? So, in your opinion, you know, has he gone to the dark side? Is that a fair appraisal?
You used a word you can't use with me. Bad word. Opinion. I don't do opinion. No. I mean, what we really try to do is give the viewer evidence and let them make up their own mind. So, I mean, nobody can totally rule out their opinions, but we try, and the way we try and do that is by making a truly multi-sided approach.
No, I understand that, but I'm wondering how, in your you know, 3-4 decades of observing, well, 3 decades of observing Putin, I suppose it would be, what the changes you think have taken place are.
Well, I think not only Putin, we all get more so as we get older, and I think he did, but he, I mean, David Cameron, I mean, there are two different ways of treating Putin. The BBC asked us, because they knew our access would be limited to the Russians. It wouldn't be like that, like it was the last time we made the series. The BBC asked us to do dealing with Putin. It was how the Western leaders that we'd interviewed over the last few decades in our Europe program, in our Obama program, in our Trump program, how they dealt with Putin and the disagreements between them as to how he should be treated. And basically, there's two ways of doing it. Either you try and woo him. David Cameron's advisor called it de-ice Putin, or you get tough with him and you slap on sanctions and you think he'll see sense. David Cameron was the quintessential person who tried it. He had the benefit of the Olympics when he came in, and he invited Putin to the Olympics. He took him to the judo. Putin is a secret judo fan, and his great hero is the Russian Olympic judo guy. And Cameron sat next to him as Putin cheered him on. And when it was over, he said, go and congratulate him. He's your guy. And Putin was too shy to go. I mean, I find it, I tell you, that sold me on making the series, and I think it probably sold it to the BBC. And you can see it on film. You see the wonder of television is you can see these things.
But was it because he was shy, or was it because he didn't want to be seen as the sort of nice guy standing grinning with sports people? He wants to be seen he wants to not be seen as de-iced. Because I thought what was interesting about his relationship as portrayed in this series with David Cameron is it ran it charted the same sort of emotional highs and lows that you would have in a romantic relationship. You know, it was a true bromance. It started, as you say, with that first date at the judo. You know, Cameron clearly admired Putin for calling the right result at the end of the judo and the judge getting it wrong. But actually then it sort of ebbed and flowed, and in the end, you know, I felt that David Cameron was slightly the jilted lover.
Right. Well, there was a little bit of that in his tone. But it's just more than just shy, I think. I mean, maybe he even thought he might be rejected, that his judo guy wouldn't have responded to him. But the best bit of that, this is in episode 2, by the way, which is next Monday.
We probably can't talk too specifically about the episodes because, of course, for listeners who haven't seen it, I think maybe the bigger
picture, but it is all on iPlayer these days. It's another wonder of modern life that you can watch them before the broadcasts get round to it. But in fact, the best bit of the bromance was they went to see the Russian Olympic site, and Putin grabbed David Cameron, jumped him into a helicopter and took off with Putin driving to see the Olympic sites. And his aides tell us about how, I mean, they honestly thought that he might have been kidnapped. So is the image of Putin, and were enormously relieved when they actually landed safely.
Well, yeah, he took him off first in a jeep, didn't he, and then into a helicopter to take him to see that site. Yeah,
and you can see it. Putin with his aviator shades, taking Cameron off to look at the Olympic sites.
Making those 3 hours of programming, which really do chart the build-up to the invasion of Ukraine a year ago. Did you get a sense that this was always a plan, or that it was the result of changes in leadership, changes in relationships, and misunderstandings along the way? I mean, how much do you put focus, for example, on the red line that was crossed in Syria?
I'm a great defender of Obama. The other thing we really try and do is show things that will show you how the leader was thinking at the time. So we see it from his point of view. So the question of the President of Assad of Syria's use of chemical weapons is really, I find, one of the most controversial in international politics for the last decade.
Why?
That Obama was going to bomb President Assad, and at an international meeting, Putin offered him that he would, because Assad is somehow sort of his client, he could persuade Assad to get rid of his chemical weapons, and then Obama wouldn't have to bomb. And Obama took it. And the way I see it, Obama, President of the United States, he's the man who has to call the parents of the people who get killed. If he sent his men in to fight, people would die, and yes, maybe they'd stop Assad bombing his people, but it would be better to get the chemical weapons out without firing a shot. So he called off the bombing. Well, a lot of people, and people even within his own administration, blame Obama because he had a red line. If Assad uses chemical weapons, I will bomb. And he didn't do it. And therefore, Putin got the impression that he's soft. And
that's what I wanted to ask you, because, I mean, very much the situation we find ourselves in now, having watched your series, the suggestion is that it is a failure of the West, not to recognise that red line with Syria, a failure of the West not to recognise when the Crimean invasion occurred, and that those signals are what influenced Putin into taking the much greater and the more outrageous step of invading Ukraine, this sense that no one was going to stop him.
Well, a lot of people who know a lot agree with you. I mean, for example, President Hollande of France. I really am genuinely undecided about that. I think if you look at Putin, his object has never changed, and he was determined that Ukraine wouldn't go to the Western camp because it was Russia. At what point he decided that he should stop it or keep it Russian by an invasion, and what point he thought he would get it by diplomacy, that they'd never do it, I suppose, is difficult to say. I mean, the way we see it in our series, when it looked like Ukraine was going to join the EU, that was a step too far to the West, and therefore he had to stop it.
How would you describe the person portrayed in your documentary series?
Because asking me such difficult questions.
Well, you know what? Isn't that what makes life fascinating? That's what your job is normally, and today it's mine.
Yeah, okay.
Because, the portrayal of him now, goes from sort of evil Bond-like villain, mad person, suggestions of, and then of course the circling rumours of the fact maybe he's not even still alive, and these are all just videos that are released. I mean, there seems to be a failure to perhaps afford him the respect of being, as I said at the beginning of this discussion, a very clever chess player.
Oh, I think they know that now. Whether various leaders recognized it from the beginning, I think from our earlier series, Tony Blair had a healthy respect for him and tried quite hard. After 9/11, he was Bush's envoy to try and persuade Putin, and they got on very well. They played Russian snooker. And the one question Alistair Campbell wouldn't answer for me was who won. But the Russians told us.
Oh, well, that'll give me something to ask Alistair next time he's on the programme.
But I think actually it was Tony Blair who admitted it, but he said that he cheated somehow. But many, in the first decade of Putin's leadership, many Western leaders had moments of real what seemed to be talking to each other, really talking to each other. There's an amazing moment in episode 2 where at a late night summit, which was really late, it was a European meeting that got delayed, and there was it was in Putin's St. Petersburg, and he had a great Sun and Lumiere thing for the
like a sort of
guests.
emperor's party.
And so the meeting between the British Prime Minister and Putin,
David Cameron,
was delayed until 2:00 in the morning, and they were both tired and grumpy, and they had an extraordinary exchange of which Putin said to the Prime Minister, well, it's a good thing that the Labour opposition stopped you going and invading when that was in the Syria chemical weapons. They voted against you in the House of Commons. So Putin came back. So Cameron came back to Putin, and he said, well, you ought to do something about your gay rights policy. It's gonna. I mean, if you want to have the Olympics, you have to behave a better way.
Yeah, and it was described as a sort of bicker fest, wasn't it, at 2:00 in the morning?
Extraordinary.
But that was the beginning of the end of the relationship. That was their who's afraid of Virginia Woolf moment.
But it does also show a sort of real relationship. I mean, showing real feeling to each other, and that doesn't happen often between international statesmen. So I mean, he does seem to demonstrate that he's someone who can have this a personal relationship with other leaders.
Who has Putin got on with best?
Well, I mean, he had a very schizophrenic relationship with Angela Merkel, who, of course, could speak Russian because she grew up in Eastern Germany. But yet he used all sorts of techniques to bully her, so that she was terrified of dogs, and he would bring a big dog into the meeting in order to cow her. I mean, he's a pretty scrupulous person, I think you could say, in the
planning.
But honestly, I think it's a hard question, because I think intelligence agencies in some of the best Western countries have been trying to analyze them for years, and you can pick evidence for one side or the other. I hope our series provides the evidence for people to make up their own mind.
Do you think that Vladimir Zelensky, who you did interview for the series, as well as Putin in the end, after a long time of trying, do you think that he understands the man he's currently engaged in mortal combat with?
Well, he grew up first in Russia, and he spent a lot of time there, and I'm sure he has studied it very carefully. I mean, we found him... And we only met him in an hour-long interview over Zoom. So, again, our assessment is really the same as the viewers. We've shown you what we saw, but we were very impressed with him. I mean, he seems a very astute leader who's played it very well.
And of all the leaders that you've encountered in the course of your long, auspicious career... Who do you feel you've admired the most? And is there someone that sort of got away? I know you had a good relationship with Bill Clinton, for example, but he seems to be the consummate charmer. I don't know if there's anyone, even people who wholly disagreed with him, who didn't have a good relationship with him, having met him.
That's okay. It's too boring to say Bill Clinton. Okay, but he, I did, and it began in 2000 over Ireland, where Endgame in Ireland, where he was the sort of supporter of Tony Blair through the Good Friday Agreement. And the reason I like Bill Clinton is he always says something surprising, as well as charming, surprising. For example, when the Good Friday Agreement was being negotiated all through the night, Tony Blair asked him to stand by his telephone in America, and he would call him when he was in trouble. And at one point, Sinn Féin was being extremely difficult. So as he gets him on the phone, Clinton gets, I think it was Jerry Adams on the phone, and says, look, you just give in, because really, I mean, the Protestants are in the majority now, but in a couple of years, given the way your birth rate's going, you're going to be in the majority. You'll be the top dog and you can do what you want. And he collapsed and gave in. Now, who would either think of that as an argument or have the nerve to use it? So, I mean, and he was always saying things that were just not what you would expect. But I filmed him first just after he left the White House, when he was all alone in Westchester in his house with one security man. Hillary was running for the Senate, and I think he was having withdrawal symptoms about talking. We couldn't get away. I mean, after the interview, he took us around his study, and it was obvious that not getting peace in the Arab-Israeli conflict was the thing that he still woke up at night about. And he showed us the pictures on his study. So, I mean, that was one Clinton. And then when we filmed him for Yugoslavia, he had become an industry with
the
rap.
foundation and the whole
and
thing.
we got 15 minutes, of which we used virtually every second.
Yeah.
But then I had a real bonus, because I thought my interviewing Clinton days were over, and I was executive producer on a series on Cuba. Cuba was the really dreadful black mark. The Cuban refugees lost him his governorship of Arkansas, and he almost was finished. But the producer who should have done it was too pregnant to fly to America, so I got one more.
I got one more with Bill.
But I was in the middle of working on another program, and I was terrified. So I was sitting at reception. We got there at lunchtime, and nobody was in the office. And suddenly a big bear hug enveloped me. Norma, it's been too long. I'm so pleased to see you. I know you don't do sort of following people around, but decided I'm going to make peace with Israel and the Arabs. Would you like to come around and be my Boswell? What a thing to be told just before you're doing an interview. So, I mean, he surprises you.
Absolutely, and clearly a good example of being in the room where it happens.
With this series, I really am pleased with David Cameron. He was the first big fish we got. It's always, people say you must get all these people after all these years of interviewing. Each time it's hard, and it was really hard because when we started working on this program, there was no war. And when the war started, it became much harder.
And so we've talked about the people you've got. Is there one that got away? Is there someone that you still think, oh, if only I'd got him, or indeed her, though invariably it tends to be a him still.
We were really lucky with this series because...
So I understand with this series, we know who you got for this series.
No, but this series this series were the three who were British Prime Ministers, all who had eluded me, who shouldn't have. For example, David Cameron, who was writing his memoirs when I did my referendum.
But Norma, surely you don't wake up in the middle of the night thinking, darn, I wish I'd got Boris Johnson. Who's the person that in the middle of the night, when you're thinking, yeah, God, if only, in those dark hours of the soul, who do you wish you'd got? Who got away? Nobody got away.
No one comes to mind. I could say Arafat, but I feel we interviewed Arafat. We had done a research interview, and he died before we did it. And we then managed to buy the film from an Israeli company that had done it. But I still
How selfish of him, Norma.
but
What about Barack?
I met in person and had the pleasure of having him feed me raw broccoli with his fingers. So I feel I filmed him, although it was someone else's interview in my program.
I could listen to these anecdotes all day, but sadly, it is a radio show, so we have to end somewhere. And you watching him, you feeding him broccoli.
No, feeding me broccoli.
Him feeding you broccoli is an image that will sustain me until we next talk. Thank you very much indeed for sparing me the time today.
The pleasure was all mine. Thank you.